Hi guys, it's Sophie and welcome to the second part of my April wrap-up. These are going to be all the books that aren't adult fiction. The first one is the only non-fiction I read this month, and this was When Breath Becomes Air by Kalanithi. I've done a full review video of this one that I'll link down below, so if you're interested then by all means check it out. I read 3 graphic novels this month, 2 of which I've already returned. The first of those was American Widow, which follows the widow of an individual who was killed in the 9/11 attacks, and speaks about her sort of interaction with not only sort of coming to terms with her husband's death, but dealing with the bureaucracy of the system that allowed her to sort of continue living and retain her husband's assets after 9/11. It's quite interesting. I think it's relatively niche, but if it is sort of interest to you then by all means pick it up. The second one I've returned was The House That Groaned by Karrie Fransman. And that one was really about the body, the sense of self, and the identity in the home that we find in our own bodies. So it was following the tenants of a Victorian house that had been split into flats, and each of them had a slightly unusual relationship to the human body. Quite interesting. I don't think it was my favourite graphic novel, but an interesting concept, and it's a graphic novel. If it's in a library near you, then maybe just have a read. It'll only take you half an hour or so. And the last one is the only one I have with me, and that is Sex Criminals Volume 2 by Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky, which sort of centres around this couple who have the ability to stop time when they orgasm, and that it turns out as we sort of progress that multiple people, not just the pair of them, have this ability, and there is a sort of underground crime ring / police force that deals with the policing of sexuality and time-stopping orgasms. I thought it was fine, but it didn't really grab me, it didn't really do anything in particular for me, though I know quite a few people have enjoyed this, so maybe it's your cup of tea. Relatively sort of funny and light and easy, but just nothing particularly special for me. And then moving on to short stories, I have 2 collections I finished this month. The first one is Murder in the Dark by Margaret Atwood. There are a few stories in here that I very much enjoyed. Making Poison I thought was wonderful. I think one was called Women's Novels, that spoke about sort of gendered writing, was really good fun. I think there's one called Boyfriends that was also good. Some of them I really liked, some of them I didn't like. It's standard fare for me for short stories, but I don't think there were as many that I enjoyed as I'd hoped. I think ultimately I quite enjoy Margaret Atwood, but I'm not one of those sort of great fans of her. I know a lot of people really love her. I'd happily read what she writes, but I'm not going to sort of jump out and try and find everything she's ever written. And then the next book I have, I've spoken to you a little bit about already, and that was There Once Lived a Girl Who Seduced Her Sister's Husband and He Hanged Himself. And these are short stories that focus around love, that focus around relationships, and I really hated every single one of them. There wasn't a single one in this collection that I enjoyed. There was very little linguistically that I enjoyed, and I didn't really feel as though the sort of message was worth it. I didn't feel as though the underlying themes gave me anything, which is really unusual. So this is a book that I really didn't like in almost all aspects. Isn't that rare? Isn't that special? Isn't that as good as finding that like ultimate 5-star book, finding a book that you really disagree with? Okay, so if you were interested in this book and you feel as though, you know, maybe there's something to it, the title's really intriguing, the cover's nice, I'm going to summarise the entire thing for you. 2 people fall in love, one of them cheats, one of them has a baby, the end. That's it. It's just variations on that same storyline. It's couples, interruption of couples, unhappiness. Couples, baby, unhappiness. That's it. That's the only variation you're allowed, is 2 people kind of happy. Not even all that happy. They're not even sort of, you know, first spring of love happy. They are just sort of, oh yes, this relationship thing is alright, I suppose this is what we ought to do. Oh no, she's pregnant, and oh, I've fallen in love with Suzanne, and I suppose it wasn't worth it anyway. And it just happens again and again and again, and I just couldn't do it. I felt like I was reading the same story. I felt as though it was very stilted. I didn't feel as though it had any particular purpose. I didn't feel as though it sort of taught me anything. It was like, yes, sometimes relationships and other people aren't worth your time. That happens, I entirely agree with that, and I have no issue with that as one story in a collection of love stories, as 2 stories in a collection of love stories, as a book. I get it, you can stop telling me the same story. Personally, I would actively recommend you don't buy this book. It's up to you, maybe you'll find some enjoyment in it. I would not want to put this on anyone. We're going to move on to historical fiction for something a bit more positive, because I really like both the historical fictions I read. The first one I didn't know how to categorise it without offending anyone, and that's The Good Man Jesus and the Scoundrel Christ by Phillip Pullman, so I just thought, well, it is historical, so it's going in that category. This book was bloody brilliant. I sat down quite late one night, I think it was sort of 10:15, and thought, do you know, maybe I'll just read a chapter and then I'll go to sleep. And I was up at like 3 AM just like, I have to finish it, I have to read it all in one go. So this is essentially a version of the New Testament. For those of you who were brought up Christian or have an understanding of Christian texts, none of the stories are going to be particularly new to you. That was something I really enjoyed. In this book, Mary, as opposed to having just Jesus, has Jesus and another boy who she calls Christ. It's two separate boys, twin boys. And one of the two of them, she's been told, is going to be the Messiah. So Jesus is a relatively ratty boy. He is he's quite curious, he's quite interested to get involved in things, but isn't always the sort of kindest, nicest boy. Christ is sort of weakly and quite retiring, but always tries to do his best and is very sort of moral, but would never be able to stand up and sort of speak about things the way that Jesus can. So as the book goes on, we essentially progress through the stories that you find in the New Testament, with Jesus being the vocal figure of Jesus that we know from the text, and Christ being his chronicler. It's really interesting, it was really different. The writing is very similar to the kind of writing you'd find in the Bible. It's very simple sentence structure, short, sharp, to the point sort of things. I'm talking New Testament, I'm not talking Old Testament. But yeah, so if you grew up with Christianity as your upbringing, if you're interested in that kind of thing, I'd really recommend that. If you are still, you know, relatively strong in your beliefs, then maybe don't, because it does, you know, it's relatively blasphemous in the way that it's treating Jesus. But if it is something that doesn't bother you or interests you, or you'd like to challenge yourself, you know, challenge your beliefs with, then just give it a go. Know that it is fiction, and it's not supposed to sort of be the true word of anyone. It's just Philip Pullman, so don't get too stressed about it. I don't want to get anyone too stressed out about a book, but I think it was great fun. It was one of the better books I read this month. And the next one I read was The Butcher's Hook by Ellis. A lot of people have reviewed this one. I thought about doing a review, but I think there's enough people's thoughts out there that really mine would just add to the same kind of themes. It's an unusual pick for me because it's essentially a romance historical fiction, which they aren't the things I like, but it was great. It was really interesting and really engaging. I was surprised by quite how much I did enjoy it. I'm not going to give you anything further because really there is a whole host of hype around this book at the moment, but I would just like to say that I did like it too, and go and check out other people's videos on it if you want more information. And then the very last section I have is sci-fi. So you guys know that sci-fi isn't something that I dip into all that much, but every now and again I will. I've spoken before about how I find that sort of space opera or unrealistic sci-fi is something that I struggle with, but the more down-to-earth sci-fi is something that I normally find more palatable and more enjoyable. The first one I wanted to talk about was The Windup Girl by Paolo Bacigalupi. So this would probably fall into the camp of books that I would not choose myself, which is quite interesting, and I quite like being able to do that, being able to challenge myself and say, actually, you know, give it a go. It's not something that you would go out and seek, and see what it is about it that you enjoy or you don't enjoy. As someone who doesn't really do sci-fi, this for me felt very much like fantasy. It felt very much like that large-scale world building, the sort of host of characters, and trying to piece together an entirely different kind of existence from a book. I think one of the things that I find quite difficult about sci-fi and fantasy, and maybe one of the reasons I don't enjoy them so much, is that despite the fact I read quite a lot, my ability to sort of create visual images is actually quite poor. Most people when they read say they see it's like a movie in their head. I don't, I just see the words. So sometimes that can mean if I'm being asked not only to try and understand the storyline and understand the characters, I've also got to be understanding logically what this world is, which is quite different to being able to just picture it and sort of see it almost, which is what I understand the majority of people sort of have when they read. So for me, when I'm reading books, the majority of the time I'm choosing them in real world situations so that I can rely on a memory of a place, as opposed to sort of creating a visual image for myself. It just makes a book sometimes a little bit too much for me. So I think that was one of the things that I struggled with. The second thing that I struggled with was there's a lot of language in here that was sort of partly Thai, partly words that just don't exist. But they weren't used often enough, in my opinion, to form a part of the vocabulary of the world. So each time I read them, I was trying to place them, and by the time I got to you know, the 6th or 7th new word, I said screw it, and that's always a bit dangerous because I just lost them. I just went nonsense word when I was reading them, and I'm sure that had I tried to keep it up then I would have understood what they were talking about, but there were certain words like a dirigible or whatever they were calling it. I think it's like a helicopter, but I didn't get that it was a helicopter until like 400 pages in, and I'm still not sure it's a helicopter, and it's just a bit frustrating. I don't know whether it's a case of my needing to read more fantasy and more sci-fi, and maybe my brain will be trained in the manner of which, you know, you create worlds. Maybe I will not be so concerned with necessarily understanding every word I read, but for now it's very alien to me, it's very different, and it's something that I can't immediately connect with, and it takes away from my experience of that book. I have one more book to show you. Thank you for hanging around. I think I've stolen like 7 hours of your lives. The last one I have is one that I tentatively put in sci-fi. I don't know where else to put it, and it's A Hologram for a King by Dave Eggers. This probably equally well could have gone in fiction, but it's a hard one to sort of place. So the storyline is about a man who has previously been very rich and quite sort of privileged, and he's been able to pay his daughter's college tuition fee for a relatively long period of time. But he was involved in making bikes, and a lot of the labour was outsourced to China. And when this happened, his business, his empire, his American-based manufacturing company crumbled, and he pretty much lost everything. So you're at the place where you have this entrepreneur who has been someone of great import in the business world, who has been deemed a sort of failure. He ends up going into the tech sector and develops, alongside this whole sort of team of individuals, a hologram. And that's where this book starts. So it's a man who has failed in his own right, who the sort of business contemporaries would consider to have failed, who has this hologram that he desperately needs to sell to a king. The company ends up in Saudi Arabia trying to sell to this sort of upcoming city. So it's a city that just doesn't exist, it's just in the middle of the desert. But this king has decided that he wants something to last, something to be his legacy, so he's just dumping money into it, and there's just this hole in the middle of the desert where there are, you know, like 2 skyscrapers and then just dust. And that's where they're going, and that's where they're gonna go and sell this product to the king. I really did like this book. I think that that's the sort of main arc that you have, but I think there's romance in there as well to an extent, and more of the sort of realistic type that I quite enjoy. And there is ageing, there's the concept of ageing, the concept of sort of worries about his body. So as he goes on, he's convinced that this lump on the back of his neck is cancer, and that's why everything's going wrong with his life, because he's got this cancer and it's addling his brain, and you know, he's going to die, and then he won't have to worry about his daughter's tuition fee. And it's sort of an excuse. It's an excuse of saying, oh, well, it's my body doing this thing, and that's why everything's not working. And slight spoiler alert, when he goes and gets it checked out, they're like, no, it's nothing, it's just a cyst, we can drain it, you'll be fine, it's nothing nasty at all. And he's a bit annoyed. He's like, well, this was everything that was wrong with my life, you can't tell me it's not cancer. And it was entertaining, it was very different. I don't think I've ever read anything quite like this, very unique, but that's kind of why I picked it up. I found that Dave Eggers' work is very unique, and each book is, so far, is quite different from the last. So yeah, it was fun. It was fun. So those are all of the non-standard adult fiction contemporary stuff that I've read this month. Really long wrap-ups, apologies. Thank you for sticking around, and I will see you soon in my next video. Bye bye.